Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the second UI2 Symposium. In the fall of 2020, we hosted the first symposium that was around the topic of public interest technology. This year, Provost Dan Reed, who is present here and who will be participating in the roundtable tomorrow, encouraged us to think about what challenges are developing around the topic of fair and equitable society. This year, the UI2 initiative, Utah Informatics Initiative, we teamed up with Tanner Humanities to host a two-day symposium dedicated to the intersection of artificial intelligence and society. We felt this is a timely issue to discuss and something that faculty spanning both main and medical campus are considering. I'd like to point out that the Tanner Humanities Center will continue this theme through the fall. For example, on October 28th, there will be a lecture by Shoshana Zuboff on the topic of AI and human values. So I encourage you to go to the Tanner Humanities website to get more details about that. For those of you who don't know, the goal of UI2 is to stimulate, cultivate, and cross-pollinate an ecosystem around digital technologies. We're seeking to empower people to individually and collectively study, design, develop, and apply digital technologies. We believe that technology doesn't just start revolutions, but empower people working together, they do. So let me give you an idea of the format of this symposium. Today, we're gonna have a keynote lecture with a Q&A period. Please place your questions in the Q&A. I think there's a Q&A button in Zoom. We will be monitoring chat also, but we would prefer you try to put them there just so we can get them all together. I'm going to introduce the speaker in a moment. We're scheduled to go till 5 o'clock today. Tomorrow, we're going to resume at 3:30, just as we did today. And we had an open call for faculty speakers to talk about various topics around AI and society. We had about 10 to 20 abstracts that were submitted. A team consisting of myself, Erica George, Andrew Aurora from Education, Jake Jensen from Humanities, and Sneha Kassar from Engineering. We reviewed all the materials and we had some excellent submissions. I mean, the decisions on how to get everything crammed into these days were difficult. So what we decided to do is that we're going to have 6 presentations tomorrow that are each 10 minutes from 6 faculty. And the remaining faculty were all offered to have pre-recorded talks that will be put online for later viewing. I recommend again that you look to the Tanner Humanities website following these symposium. The 6 faculty talks will be tomorrow, and then we'll conclude with a roundtable that will consist of our Provost Dan Reed and Erica George and our guest speaker, and that will be moderated by Valerio Pascucci. So I'd like to take a moment also to thank a few of the people who made this happen. Katie Piula, Rebecca Walsh, John Melkai, and Sean Wood. They've been very instrumental in getting this all together. So I want to definitely say thank you to them. So Erica, before we get started with me introducing the speakers, anything else you'd like to add?
I would like to add my appreciation and enthusiasm. I've appreciated working with my colleague, Mike Kirby, and the UI2 colleagues. Tanner Humanities Center is the oldest humanities center at the University of Utah. We have 3 pillars of programming. Mike has introduced you to one, which is our public humanities. And one of the things we've launched is Tanner Talks. And we've had a conversation about technology going on for the past year. Last year, we had speakers examining the role of search engines and the way that race and technology interplay, and ways we might think about developing and designing products that decode discrimination. This is a particularly timely time to have our guest with us. I am also a professor at the law school in addition to the College of Humanities. And just last week, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights was tasked with releasing a framework report on digital rights and surveillance technologies. So I think this gives us much to talk about, particularly in the COVID age where we're using geolocation, contact tracing. We've become reliant in ways on technology that are actually really constructive. So considering the human element and how we have brought into conversation colleagues from across this campus to talk about society and how technology is shaping it and how society is shaping technology is very exciting. And this will be the first of many conversations building on our guests' work. So without further ado, I'll allow you to introduce our very exciting guest. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you especially to our SVP, Dan Reed, for supporting this initiative.
All right, thank you, Erica. Well, I'm pleased to announce that the 2021 keynote speaker is Professor Moshe Vardi. Moshe is a university professor and Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor of Computational Engineering at Rice University. He's both a distinguished mathematician and distinguished computer scientist. He currently leads the Technology, Culture, and Society Initiative at Rice University and is at the forefront of understanding the deep impact of technology on humans and culture. His work has touched on automated learning and artificial intelligence throughout his academic career and relates directly to this symposium. He is one of academia's premier computer scientists, and he previously held the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology chair. He also previously chaired the computer science department at Rice. He has multiple research interests, including database systems, computational complexity theory, multi-agent systems, and design specification and verification. He received his PhD from Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I think for all of you who are faculty members, you'll appreciate this. He's the author or co-author of over 600 articles, as well as 2 books, Reasoning About Knowledge and Finite Model Theory and Its Applications, and he's the editor of several collections. In addition, he is a U.S. National Academy of Engineering and National Academy of Science member, an American Academy of Arts and Sciences member, and a member of the European Academy of Sciences. So with that, I am very pleased to introduce Professor Moshe Vardi. Moshe?
Thank you all. Thank you for joining me today for a conversation about AI and ethics. And you probably can also see just from the title that it's not going to be just a conventional talk about AI and ethics. But I'm going to start with a little bit of background, kind of a bit of a historical background. One of the first articles in, so to speak, AI was written by Alan Turing in 1950 on computing machinery and intelligence. The article is very often cited for the imitation game or the Turing test, and which was also the name of the movie where I took a picture from. But this was not the central point of the article. The central point of the article is really a philosophical question. It appeared in a philosophical journal, Mind. And the question was, can machines be intelligent? And Turing examined several objections, philosophical objections, and he rebuts them compellingly, in my opinion, one after the other. And he concludes, I believe that at the end of the century, that will be the 20th century, the use of words and general liquid opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machine thinking without expecting to be contradicted. Well, as we know, the 20th century has ended. And do I think that my laptop thinks? Nah, not quite. So Turing, like many other people in AI, was somewhat guilty of over-optimism. And his over-optimism was endemic, at least in the early years, 1958, which was the year that really, the very early years of AI research, Herb Simon and Alan Newell, within 10 years, a digital computer will be the world champion. Didn't happen in 10 years. It took much longer. It took about, from that point, it took about 40 years. Marvin Minsky, 1967, within a generation, the problem of creating artificial intelligence will substantially be solved. Well, not quite. And this early optimism and its failure to deliver result in what we would call AI winter, period of slow progress and dearth of research funding. The first AI winter was in the 1970s, then in the late 80s and early 90s, to AI winter. When I kind of started my career, AI had a little bit of a flavor of a discipline that always overpromises and underdelivers. That started to change in 1997. In that year, IBM Deep Blue beat Kasparov in a 6-game chess tournament. Here you see Kasparov walking away, upset, self-disgust maybe, after where he lost the second game. I was personally involved in that because IBM, I was already at Rice at the time. IBM invited me to come to New York and watch the tournament. And I watched the first game, and the first game Kasparov won. And I said, well, I believe that one day computer will win, but maybe the time has not come. and I left a bit early. I did not stay for the whole tournament. I left after one day. I went back to Houston. We were still fairly new in Houston, not many friends. My wife was left alone. I went back to Houston, and it was the second game where Deep Blue won. And my life regret is that I missed seeing that game. Many people expected and IBM in particular expected to see much follow-up to that thing, but really not much happened. It was a technical feat, but not much happened in AI after that. In particular, IBM built very specialized hardware just for this game. It was not clear how to leverage. You see, this is Deep Blue. It was not clear how to leverage it for other tasks. But in 2011, there was another accomplishment by IBM. And this time, the system called Watson defeated the Brad Ratters and Ken Jennings in a game of Jeopardy. And that seems much more impressive, but it was always clear that chess is just a brute force game. But Jeopardy requires understanding of natural language and history and culture. So for a machine to beat two really fantastic players in Jeopardy was a big surprise. And I would say this is where at least I and many other people start thinking, wow, my goodness, this AI business is serious for now. This is now serious business. It's not a joke anymore. And a few years later, about 5 years later, this time Google built another system called Alphago, and it beat the Go master, Lee Sedol, in the game of Go. Now, if you look at the game of Go, you see here the board. You see the board is larger. There are more squares on the board, and the pieces are simpler. It's just black and white pieces. And so the Go was always considered to be a more challenging game than chess. And just brute force was not going to manage to help us with Go. So in fact, to win the game in Go, AlphaGo combined the searching in the three, what we call tree search technique. But in addition, use machine learning, and AlphaGo developed intuition for playing Go. And this is really very revolutionary, that machines develop intuition. And for this, we have to go back to 1966, and a philosopher Polanyi there's something called Polanyi's paradox. And the paradox is we know more than we can tell. The skill of a driver cannot be replaced by thorough schooling in the theory of the motor car. We all understand that you can read a book about the theory of driving, and it won't teach you to drive. I know it personally because I tried. So, but now we have using machine learning, and what AlphaGo did was first of all digested hundreds of thousands of published Go games, and then it played millions of rounds against itself to develop intuition. What is a good configuration in chess? Because chess, the way Go masters play, they have a feel for the board. They feel that it's a good configuration or not a good configuration. And the fact that we can go back, it's very hard to explain to people exactly how to drive. Think of even more like riding bicycle. Try to teach an adult to read bicycle. If you know how to bike, it's very easy, but you cannot explain how you balance yourself on a bicycle. But now machine learning can overcome this language barrier. We don't have to give instruction how to do it. We just learn from data. And that gave rise to starting in the middle of about 15 years ago, 16 years ago, oh, we are going to revolutionize transportation. This is the Google cars and the Waymo car. And we're going to have AVs, autonomous vehicle, everywhere. Was just about to happen. Well, it hasn't happened yet. And even worse, AVs start killing people. So Tesla in March 2010, there was a collision between an SUV with a partial driving automation and running essentially into a barrier in Mountain View, and a person was killed. And the NTSB says, well, the system were inadequate. So it was deployed before it was really fully vetted, so to speak, and said, NTSB said more crashes are available. And then about the same time, shortly after that, an Uber autonomous vehicle with a safety driver on board killed a pedestrian. And again, NTSB said Uber did not have a formal safety plan in place. In fact, it turns out Uber disabled automatic emergency braking in order to prevent erratic driving. And somehow the safety driver was charged, but Uber did not face charges. And this was kind of these events were, to me, kind of a turning point where people starting to saying, well, this technology is not just all, a rose garden. There are problems with technology. Now, the truth is, even before that, we have learned that there are problems. In 2016, ProPublica wrote a big expose about machine bias. That's when we started realizing the machine learning create bias. And in particular, what ProPublica did, it used the software to predict future recidivism on two identical dossiers, except one was black person, the other one was a white person. And it turned out that the system Compass was biased against black defendants. And the reason was because we all know there is historical bias in the United States against black in the justice system. So if you learn from this, that's what you're going to continue to do. The way I say it, there is a phrase, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And my take on it is those who machine learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And then a book came out in 2017 by Cathy O'Neill, Weapons of Math Destruction, How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threaten Democracy. New York Times wrote a review, a frightening look in how algorithms are increasingly regulating people. And already before that, Nick Bostrom wrote a book about superintelligence, how machines will take over essentially. Now, not everybody took Nick Bostrom seriously. He's a philosopher, not an AI researcher. But Stuart Russell wrote a book called Human Compatible. And he wrote, if the predicted breakthroughs occur and superhuman AI emerges, we'll have created entities far more powerful than ourselves. How can we ensure they never, ever have power over us? And in 2017, Peggy Noonan, a well-known columnist for the Wall Street Journal, wrote a column, and she coined the phrase, that phrase was coined the techlash. The backlash against technology became known as the techlash. And she wrote, because all of our personal functional information, she wrote about Americans and how Americans feel about technology. And she wrote, because all of their personal and financial information got hacked in the latest breach, because our country's real overloads are in Silicon Valley and appear to be moral Martians who operate on some weird new postmodern ethical wavelengths. And they will be the ones programming the robots that will soon take all the jobs. So October 2017, for me, it was a turning point. I realized, wow, people have very negative feelings about technology. And then when people start talking about the ethics crisis, New York Times, tech ethical dark side, Boston Globe, computer science faces an ethics crisis, New York Times, something chief ethics officer could help technology companies navigate political and social questions, VentureBeat, Facebook backs Institute for Ethics in AI with $7.5 million. So what you see here from all these different newspapers is that in somewhere around beginning of 2018 and early 2019, became clear the problem that we have with technology is all about ethics, ethics, ethics. And now there are textbooks, came out in 2020, AI Ethics. You can go and buy it now on Amazon. And in February of 2020, in Rome, the Rome called for AI ethics. And the Pontifical Academy for Life with Microsoft, IBM, something about agriculture and something else, some UN, Italian government signed as a first call for AI ethics. And they wrote, given the innovative and complex nature of the questions posed by digital transformation, it is essential for all stakeholders involved to work together and for all needs affected by AI to be represented. And again, it's all about ethics, the value and principle that we're able to instill in AI will help to establish a framework that regulates and acts as a point of reference for digital ethics. And Deloitte say now, wow, every company needs some ethics advising, chief ethics officer, AI ethicist, AI ethics council. So every company needs some kind of ethics officer to advise them how to behave ethically. And Google has a group for responsible AI, and they're going to raise new questions about how to build fairness, interpretability, privacy, and security into these systems. And just recently, Google stopped some project because of ethics violation or ethics question mark. In September of last year, so that's about a year ago, Google's cloud unit looked into using AI to help a financial firm decide whom to lend money to. Turned down the client's idea after weeks of internal discussion, deeming the project too ethically dicey because the AI technology could perpetuate biases like those around race and gender. So Google said, look, we're a very ethical company. We are stopping project because we think they're ethical questions. And there is even the partnership for AI. It's a big partnership to benefit people in society. And it has many companies are members, Apple, Facebook, Google. So all these companies care very much about ethics, they tell us. We are very, very ethically oriented, they try to tell us. In fact, as we mentioned, in 2019, January 2019, Facebook gave $7.5 million to the Technical Institute, Technical University of Munich, to establish a new independent institute for ethics and AI. And the press release says at Facebook, ensuring the responsible and thoughtful use of AI is foundational to everything we do, from the data label we use to the individual algorithms we build to the system they are part of. So they're all paragon, all these companies are paragons of ethics, they say. But in 2019, Ben Wagner, a Dutch philosopher, wrote an article titled Ethics as an Escape from Regulation, from ethics washing to ethics shopping. And he wrote, a strange confusion among technology policy makers can be witnessed at present. In this confused environment, it is perhaps unsurprising that the idea of ethics is presented as a concrete policy option. People think that the way we are going to manage, somehow live with technology, is by putting ethics at the top of, just thinking ethically. Striving for ethical decision-making is argued will make technologies better. And he concluded, while this may be true in many cases, much of the debate about ethics seems to provide an easy alternative to government regulation. And in the rest of the talk, I will expand on this point of the tension between ethics on one hand and regulation on the other hand. So I want to first to contrast this, the issue that we have with technology, with the Ford Model T. The Ford Model T rolled off the manufacturing line in 1908 and became the first mass-consume, mass-produced automobile. And fairly quickly, we discovered that having lots of automobiles means people get killed by car crashes. So we have been dealing with motor vehicle years. How did we do? Well, it depends how you measure it. Of course, it's a big country, more people, more cars. So more and more people do get killed. So people in the transportation business said the best measure is number of deaths per billions vehicles mile travel, VMT, vehicles mile travel. And this is the red line you see here. And you can see that we have been able to reduce it from almost 250 in the beginning of the 20th century to somewhere around now, it's less than 10. So major improvement. So we've been able to reduce mortality due to motor vehicle significantly. How did we do it? By many different measures. We realized that we need better vision. We use mirrors, interlock brakes, airbags, crosswalk, traffic lights, DWI. We have many measures to make traffic safer. What did we do? We did not say the solution is to have ethics driving ethics training for driver. We did not say we need to train all drivers in ethical driving. That was not what we said. What did we say? We did say the solution is public policy. And what do I mean by public policy? Making decision about, for example, passing laws about DWI, that's public policy. It's not about ethics, it's about public policy. So all these measures can be covered, deciding what to leave to engineer, what to do here. Overall, it's about what we established here was public policy. So the argument here is what we need with technology is not that we don't need ethics. I'll come back to ethics at the end, but we need more public policy. The way we have public policy govern our traffic system, deciding to change, to put traffic lights, deciding to have speed limit. All of these are put under public policy. So I want to take one example, which is machine learning in the justice system. So in 2017, Shirley Ann Jackson, the president of RPI, is hosting John G. Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States. And they have a fireside chat, and she asked him, can you foresee a day when smart machine, driven with artificial intelligence, says, will assist with courtroom fact-finding, or more controversial, even with judicial decision-making? And John G. Roberts says, it's a day that's here, and it's putting significant strain on how the judiciary goes about doing things. New York Times described it as an algorithm that grants freedom or takes it away. So the question here is, what kind of should we allow machines to make in judicial decision making? And what do I mean by decision making in the justice system? There are many applications: bail, sentences, parole, separating children from parents, and so on and so forth. One of the systems for making this kind of recommendation is called the Compass system. It is sold by a company called North Point, and they have a beautiful website about advancing justice and embracing community. Who can be against advancing justice and embracing community? Wow. And look at this beautiful, elegant design. But people realize there are problems with this. Michelle Alexander, a writer, columnist for the New York Times, called it the new Jim Crow. And she wrote, recent criminal justice reform contained the seeds of a fighting system of incarceration. These advanced mathematical models appear colorblind on the surface, but also significantly influenced by pervasive bias in the criminal justice system. When independent audit was conducted of the system Compass, it turned out that while Compass claimed to use 137 features, it really just basically, it's a linear classifier. So the company makes a big thing about how sophisticated the system is. In reality, it's a very basic linear classifier. So I want to give an analogy. Imagine I take my dog, Fluffy, who is a black, you see it's a black Labrador, and I train Fluffy to detect risk of recidivism. And I even took Fluffy down to the federal court in Houston to check whether Fluffy is accurate. And Fluffy is uncannily accurate. But Fluffy, as you can see, it's a black box. And Fluffy does not provide explanations. So the question is, should we allow Fluffy to make parole decisions? Should we give Fluffy ethics training? Now, of course, all of this is not serious. Well, am I joking, right? Well, the point is that there is no big difference between a black box machine learning and this cute black box that you see here on the screen. In fact, I would say this Fluffy is a much cuter black box. And the analogy is that using Fluffy to make decision and using AI to make decision is on the same are somewhat equivalent. In 2018, James Larus and Chris Hanke in the communication of the ACM wrote about how to regulate decision system. And they say we have not been doing it because there is disdain for regulation, which is pervasive throughout the tech industry. In the case of automated decision-making, this attitude is mistaken. And they argue that we need to audit automated decision system to make sure that they make unbiased and fair decision. And this is you go back and you ask the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, wait a minute, you're in charge of regulating the federal court system. Why are you taking a passive attitude? Remember the attitude that he was taking? This moment it's upon us. That's what he said. A moment it's upon us. But John G. Roberts is the chief regulator of the federal court system. And he could come up with a rule that says that we need to audit automated decision systems. So I want the tension here, why don't we have public policy for technology? We talk about ethics, what about public policy? So I want to give a little kind of background why we don't have policy for technology. So let's look at the internet. You look at the beginning of the internet. Internet, I don't mean just the technical infrastructure. I mean the whole ecosystem of the internet and as a communication medium. I remember way back in the early 80s, I was just a young postdoc at Stanford. There was something called the WELL, which was a dial-up bulletin board. And there was a system called Usenet, Unix to Unix network, which was essentially another kind of one of the first social medium that I remember. And when you look at the development of the system, you see they were very influenced in the culture of the Bay Area at the time. And the culture of the Bay Area of the time was the culture of the 1970s. And the 60s really happened in the 1970s. This was the aftermath of the Vietnam War. There was the hippie movement. It was very much anti-establishment. And out of this cultural moment came the mantra, information wants to be free. Well, information not just bits. Information doesn't want anything, but somehow this became popular. So when Tim Berners-Lee started the World Wide Web in the late 80s, his motto was unfettered public sharing of information. The more, the merrier. But when you have so much information, you have a problem. How can you find something? How do you find things on the internet when there's too much information? So at first, people try directory. If you remember Yahoo tried to have a catalog for the whole internet. It didn't scale when the internet became too large to have a directory. Some early search engines were pretty bad. But then Google came up with a fantastic search engine. I remember when Google came out, we were all stunned. You can put a search term and hit, and the first thing on the screen would be the right thing. But everybody was with the mindset information wants to be free. So how do you make money? You have a company. You need to build a company. You need to monetize free information. So Google had a brilliant idea. Let's use TV at the time was broadcast TV was free. And how did broadcast TV make money? By advertising. Newspapers are very, very cheap. How do they make money? Advertising. They said the same thing. We'll use advertising. But they discovered that online advertising is very ineffective. If the ad is too large, people hate it. If the ad is small, people don't click it. So they came up with another brilliant business idea, micro-targeted advertising. Match the ads with individual preferences, and they gather tons of personal data. You think that Google only tracks you online. You're wrong. Google tracks you wherever you go. Whenever you spend money with a credit card, Google knows about it. And the key application of machine learning is deciding what advertisement to show you. People talk about, oh, we don't want to, loan approval. You're at the end of machine learning algorithm every time you browse the web, because machine learning decides what advertisement you're going to see. For example, go to Google and ask what is Exxon. Then it depends on what Google think of you. You might see an ad that tells you how ExxonMobil is capturing carbon CO2 directly from the atmosphere, or you might see an advertisement, again, unnecessary regulation that slow our economy down. These are both Exxon advertisements. Exxon pays for both of them. And based on machine learning, they'll decide which ad to show to whom. You're going to hear from Shoshana Zuboff. So I'll give you just, I'll do an advertisement for her, and I will see if I will be able to attend her talk myself. But the principle that people say about surveillance capitalism, if you're not paying for it, you are the product. So you are not a customer of Google or Facebook. You're a user of customer of Google and Facebook. And what Google does, its business model is they take your data and they sell it to the advertiser. Their client, their customers are the advertisement, and the commodity, the advertising, is the personal data about you. And you'll hear about the age of surveillance capitalism. And I think it's a huge book that you may be reluctant to read end to end. I highly recommend an article she wrote in the New York Times earlier this year after the Capitol insurrection. She wrote, "We can have democracy or we can have surveillance society, but we cannot have both." She said, in our society, knowledge is power, and the tech company know all about us, and we know very little about them. What do we do with our data? Who gets our data? We have no idea. So she said, we cannot have democracy and surveillance capitalism do not go together. And indeed, it's interesting that this cartoon show that came up later after I think Facebook and Twitter shut down Trump. Then some people thank you for thank big tech, but the way it is covered in the cartoon, big tech is an octopus sitting on top of Capitol Hill, while the progressive are thanking big tech for shutting down the insurrection. Let's talk a little bit about Facebook. Again, to maximize advertising revenue, we have to maximize user engagement. How do we do that? Machine learning. Every time you use Facebook, machine learning is in action. And this has been called addiction by design. Already in 2013, the Atlantic wrote what an anthropologist's examination of Vegas slot machines reveals about the hour we spend on social network. The same way that slot machines are designed to keep people playing, social media is designed to keep people also playing, because you get a little bit social approval, you get some dopamine, and you're hooked. And in 2010, Richard Fried wrote about this unfair battle. On one hand, you have us, but also in particular children, teens and children. And on the other hand, you have psychologists, trained psychologists, with lots of sophisticated psychological research, trying to make the system as addictive as possible. And he called it the innocent war on kids. And to understand the impact of this war on kids, let's look at suicide rate. This is absolutely shocking. In October 2019, the CDC, suicide rate of children between ages 10 to 24 was stable from 2000 to 2007, and then increased 56% in the next 10 years. But among children 10 to 14, suicide rate tripled. Now, what happened? You ask yourself, what happened in 2007? Well, the iPhone happened in June 2007, and the Facebook iPhone app happened in July 2008. So when we talked about the tech industry war on kids, it is really war on kids. Kids are paying with their life because this product have been designed to be addictive. Now, how well has this worked for Google, for example? Well, the answer is it has worked incredibly well for Google. This shows data up to 2019. By now, it's about close to $150 billion a year advertising revenue. So it was a brilliant business. Surveillance capitalism has been a brilliant business model. So imagine we're going to send Sergey Brin and Larry Page to an ethics bootcamp in Munich, let's say, Institute of AI in Ethics. Are they going to come back and says, oh, we feel so sorry about surveillance capitalism, we're going to ditch it? $150 billion a year. They're not going to ditch it. They're going to keep doing it, ethics or no ethics. And in a column in January of 2019, I wrote, if society finds the surveillance business model offensive, then the remedy is public policy in forms of laws and regulation rather than ethics outrage. That's not how you don't run a society by saying, oh, you're bad, you're unethical. We don't want them to do it. Let's pass laws and regulation. But in the meantime, Google is stuck between its ethics facade and its unethical business model. I consider surveillance capitalism to be unethical. And Google is stuck between this facade and the reality. So they went through a whole scandal over the past year from Wired magazine of June of this year. And they talk about the fact that Google fired Timnit Gebru, a researcher who wrote about she warned that messy AI can spread racism. So Google hired her and then Google fired her. Can big tech criticism from within? But it was not just about Timnit Gebru that was fired. Later on, another researcher, Margaret Mitchell, was fired. And then the whole brouhaha inside Google. And then in March of this year, a conference, Fate, decided to suspend Google sponsorship, to say your money is dirty, take your money and go away. And now Google says, well, okay, we're going to stop tracking individuals. They have something called Flock. We will see what are they going to do. But the answer is right now they have incredibly successful business model, ethics, schmethics. It's very hard to give up when you're making $150 billion a year. And Facebook, the Wall Street Journal, this anti-business publication called the Wall Street Journal, just came up with a scathing expose, a series of articles about Facebook just in the last month. And they have somebody leak internal documents from inside Facebook, make body image issue worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. We are not actually doing what we said what we say publicly. Misinformation, toxicity, and violent content are inordinately prevalent among resharers. An unfortunate side effect is that harmful and misinformative content can go viral, even before we catch it and mitigate its effect. Notice it's all written in the first person. We. This is Facebook inside. How did it affect its business model? So far, none. So one thing that people always say, yes, but I get all these wonderful free services from Facebook and Google. Really? You think that Facebook, Google is free? How do they make $150 billion? Alex Webb at Bloomberg wrote, the whole web pays for Google and Facebook to be free because Google has customers. These are the advertising company. How do they pay for advertising? They pass the cost to us consumers at the end. So we pay for Google services, but in an opaque and invisible way that give us mass surveillance. And you're lucky to hear in the near future from Shoshana Zuboff, who I'm sure will elaborate even more about this. Now, some people say people willingly give the information away. But the answer is most people have no idea what's happening under the cover. So for example, you can go click on several menus on advertising, and eventually you find your profile. About 3/4 of people do not know that Facebook has a profile of them. When they're shown this profile, 51% are uncomfortable with it. 27% disagree with Facebook profiling of them. Just to give you one example, Facebook says that I am very liberal. I think of myself as a centrist. And now I have a cognitive dissonance. I don't know what I am. Am I a centrist the way I perceive myself? Or is Facebook right, calling me very liberal? I can ask this audience, okay, have you read, I would suspect that 90+% of the people here have used Gmail. And I suspect that of these people who use Gmail, 90+% never read terms of services. Why? Because it's long and it was not meant to be read. It was written as not to be read. So this consent, some people, there was an article called the con in consent. The consent is a con. And furthermore, the idea that information has value was destroyed. The market has pluses and minuses. But one thing that market does very well, it discovered the value of things. What is the value of this laptop? Well, however much people are willing to pay for it. But if information is free, then information has no value. So my point is at the end that I don't think the problem with Facebook and Google is a problem of ethics. It's a problem we don't have public policy. What they're doing is completely legal. We don't like it, but it's completely legal. We can't ask them to stop doing it when they have a very successful, these are today immensely powerful corporation. They make lots of money. we should not expect them to abandon a business model because we think it's unethical. So the big five tech, this is Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Facebook. Their market capitalism is more than $9 trillion. They're about at least 25% of the S&P 500, immensely powerful industry, and they have lobbied so far very successfully, saying regulation will stifle innovation. Don't regulate us, will stifle innovation. And there was an article in the Wired magazine, a very techy magazine in 2019. Elon Musk had some tweets that the SEC argued they were meant to manipulate the stock price. And so they started an investigation for stock price manipulation. And Wired said, oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. The case against Elon Musk will chill innovation. So Elon Musk should be above the law in the name of innovation. And the pandemic, powerful. The reality is that the pandemic has been, of course, an unmitigated disaster, but it would have been much, much worse without technology. Without technology, I will not be able to sit here in my home office and give you such a talk. So, in fact, New York Times wrote last April how big tech won the pandemic. A year ago, even the tech giants were anxious. Now they have so much money, it is awkward. One way to understand what's happening is what I would call a techno-utopian culture. So in 1996, John Perry Barlow wrote a Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And it was fancy, very lofty language. Governments of the industrial world, you were a giant of flesh and steel. I come from cyberspace, the new home of the mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. And of course, we know that what happened in cyberspace does not stay in cyberspace. We now face the possibility, for example, of a cyber attack on the US power grid. So somehow to leave this unregulated exposes all of us. It's not just about our personal data anymore. It's about crucial infrastructure. We've seen it, for example, there was a ransomware attack on a oil and gas line. And again, an attack on the US power grid is not inconceivable. And from this techno-utopian culture, the next phrase was disruptive innovation. In 1995, Clayton Christensen, who recently passed away, wrote an article describing how one innovation disrupt one technology disrupt the previous technology. And he used disruptive innovation in a descriptive way. But now it's become a mantra. Hefferman, New York Times, wrote last October, ennobling destruction and sabotage make the most brutal form of capitalism seems like God will. This is the way it's supposed to be. We live in some kind of Darwinian jungle where one technology disrupts the other one. And from disruption, we went to breaking. Facebook had a motto in the early years, move fast and break things. Now Facebook removed that motto because it was bad for PR, but they continue to behave like that. We're not talking anymore about just breaking the payroll system. We're talking about breaking our democracy. Article in Time magazine from January, like, share, recruit, well-armed white supremacist militia goes global with Facebook, and it's all driven by machine learning. It's well established how you open one, like YouTube has become known as an engine for radicalization. You watch one video, it recommends another video, then it recommends another video, and people get radicalized by sitting there and falling into the black hole of extremism. And we end up in the Capitol insurrection of January 6th, and we have yet to fully understand the role of social media, but social media played there, but it clearly played a major role, maybe not Facebook, but social media clearly played a major role. And so when you talk about move fast and break things, how about breaking democracy? Now, there was a lot to talk about corporate responsibility. Now, you go back 50 years, and corporate responsibility was about all kinds of different stakeholders. But then an extreme ideology was proposed by Milton Friedman in 1970. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profit. That's it. It's all about making money. And by 2019, even the Business Roundtable decided this is too extreme, and this has been a very bad ideology. So the real question to me is, going back to public policy, technology is driving the future, but who is doing the steering? And the answer is right now, society has given up. Tech corporations are, and the marketplace is doing the steering. Public policy has lagged behind technology. Yes, of course, regulation may stifle innovation, but innovation is not a goal. Innovation is means to an end. And the end should be societal progress. And we need to figure out how to harness technology with the goal of the public good. Now, again, Benjamin Applebaum wrote to say we're blaming Milton Friedman, and we're trying to figure out how to make corporations more responsible. He said this is the wrong battle. We need to figure out what the proper role of government. He wrote, government remain the most powerful means to express our collective will. The necessary solution is to create stronger incentive for good behavior and laws against bad behavior. We should not expect corporations to behave better. We should establish the legal framework that will incentivize them or punish them for proper behavior. So does it mean that I think ethics is not important? Of course, ethics is important. You know, the Rome Code starts with all human beings are born free and equal dignity and rights. Of course, I agree with it. In fact, I teach a course, I established a course on ethics, tech ethics at Rice University for students. Ethics should inform public policy. Chief Justice Earl Warren said in civilized life, the law floats in a sea of ethics. Ethics is the underlying ocean of values that provide us and allow us to build the right institution and the right laws. But the law is institutionalized. Ethics is not. With few exceptions, medical law, ethics is not institutionalized. Regulation seems to be coming. We see now Tim Cook talks about about regulation. Mark Zuckerberg even talk about regulation. Reuters talk about regulation. Washington Post talk about regulation. It seems the regulation is coming. But regulating is difficult. It's not so easy to come up with the right regulation. Smart regulation is hard. Different approaches between the US and Europe. What about international treaties? Is big tech too big? Tim Wu wrote a couple of years ago, be afraid of economic business, be very afraid. Should we force Facebook to spin off Instagram and WhatsApp? I think so too. I think so. One of the major dilemmas that we have, I call it the social trilemma. Why is big tech policing speech? Because the government isn't. We're uncomfortable with the government regulating speech. We're uncomfortable with Silicon Valley regulating speech. We're uncomfortable when nobody's regulating speech. When the internet becomes a cesspool of extremism and bad content, we're also uncomfortable. And this is what I would call the social trilemma. And the role that Facebook is playing is come out more and more. We know that Facebook, some figures, some VIPs do not, you know, if you put some bad content, Facebook may shut you very quickly. But VIPs have a special set of rules, and they can get away with things that you and I cannot get away with. So, who drives technology? This is, to me, the essential question. Tristan Green wrote an article about ethics of AI a year and a half ago, and he said, when we write the ethics of AI, we're asking two simple questions. Is it ethical to build an AI for this specific purpose? Is it ethical to be AI with these capabilities? I think this is too narrow. I would also say, who benefits, cui bono, and who decides? Kate Crawford wrote in an article this year, stop talking about AI ethics. It's time to talk about power. Power to the people, I would say. BMW had an interesting advertisement recently that I saw. BMW, the slogan was always the ultimate driving machine. But now they're facing a world with autonomous vehicles. So the new slogan is, don't be driven by technology, drive it. I think this slogan is also good for all of us. We should not be driven by technology. We should, as a society, drive it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Moshe. So we'll open it up now for questions. We have one, so we have several that were posted. One of them, can you touch on potential detriments of eye tracking relevant to the subject of big data?
So there's a whole issue of eye tracking and I would say and face recognition. So we rely, there are certain things that have to do with privacy that we don't even think about. You walk in the street, unless people know you, you have the anonymity, you're in the crowd, you're a person in the crowd. You walk into a shop and you want to buy something. You are anonymous, you are just John Q, they don't know who you are. Now imagine you walk into a store, and as you walk into the store, poof, on the screen, they see a profile of you, and who are you? And what do you like? And what would you like to shop? And they know what you're going to the store, and they know what you're looking at. And the prices are today, it used to be that we will have stickers with prices, but it's very expensive to update the prices so that the prices are electronic. As you're moving down the aisle, the prices are changing for you because they know everything about you and how much you're willing to pay. This sounds like science fiction. This technology is available today, and we don't have law against it. This is the real issue. I mean, the issue, remember, the imbalance. What do they know about us? What do we know about them? And the answer is there is huge, that's what Shoshana Zuboff is talking, call it epistemic inequality. A gap, a tremendous gap in knowledge between what we know, which is very little, and what companies can know more and more about us. And that's even why some tech companies are saying, oh my goodness, this face recognition is scary. We want regulation. When do they find it? They say, please regulate us, please regulate us. It's because really you can, actually I read recently, it's interesting, I read the review of what is it called, Black Mirror. And there was a review on Wired magazine it was last year, I think, earlier this year on the most recent season. And the complaint was, it is not dystopian enough. It's too realistic. So Black Mirror used to be this very tech dystopia TV show. Now it just become a reality show. What's going on here? We want dystopia. Don't show us reality. Well, the answer is maybe we're living in tech dystopia. So yes, so I think this is, again, we need to, there is a, I remember reading about the Amish, and people think the Amish are against technology. But the Amish have a different way of thinking. They want technology to serve their values. So they look at every technology, does it serve our values or not? So they say, for example, the automobile will cause dispersal of the community. So that's bad. So we're going to continue with horse and buggy. Cell phone means people are talking to each other. That's good. Talking is good. Cell phones are okay. Smartphones, people are spending their time alone with a smartphone. So smartphone is bad. So I'm not saying we need to copy the Amish, but there is something that I like about this, that we think of technology with not will it make money or not, what will it do to society? We live today in a society that is deeply polarized, that is in some sense of the polarization is so deep that I would say this is a society in crisis. I think there is I could give a whole talk just on that topic, and I would call it tech and democracy. And I think there is a good reason to say that technology has been not the only factor, it's a bit more complicated than that, but technology has been a major factor in the current malaise of American society.
Okay, I think the next question then falls on nicely. The person thanks you for your talk and asks, what do you think the role of experts, they put that in quotes, and they said, e.g. people in academia, should be on driving this policymaking?
So the question is, for example, take what I consider where there are certain technical areas where I would consider myself an expert. I'm not an expert in public policy. So for example, very often I give this talk and people say, give us specific policy. What should we do about social media? And what I can say is, it's a real difficult problem. As I call it the social trilemma. I don't have a magic solution. I think we need to start to have, and this is where I think, for example, something like the Tanner School, the Tanner Center can bring together people. This require the people who understand the technology, people who understand society. This is we're dealing here with the societal impact of technology. Humanists who can bring values to the picture. You know, what is the value of you know, the think of human rights and values, and something that I think is not fully developed in academia, which is policy studies. So there are some universities have school of policy. There are some such policies. Very often, policy studies are done in think tanks. We need to figure out how to bridge this and start thinking about all aspects of technology. The technology, its societal impact, values, and what will be concrete policies. And ideally, we will do that. We won't wait until we're in a crisis situation. We will start to do it early on. Look at technology. You know, think of what we do now today. We understand about many other technology, like buildings. You know, a certain project. We said first you do environmental impact assessment. You don't just deploy something massively and then look at the impact. First, you do impact assessment. Maybe we need to do something with technology, but I don't think there's any one place where we have the expertise. I think we all need to get together and learn to talk to each other. You know, you talk to social scientists, they don't fully understand the technology. So this has to be a campus-wide conversation, even beyond the campus.
That segues into the next question, which is good. I think this is on misinformation. And I think this could be viewed within the context of the experts, plural, that you're talking about, but also kind of broadly. And that would be, what do you think regulation, you know, what role does regulation play in eliminating misinformation? It is user-generated content, so some freedom of speech should be allowed, and that's posed as a question.
So one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century was Kurt Gödel. And Gödel showed that the so-called liar's paradox, when I said, we just heard that Tucker Carlson says, I lie. And now, should we believe him or not? So this is a beautiful example, just recent example of the liar's paradox. So Gödel showed that you can actually have a sentence, write a mathematical theorem that says, I'm not provable. So can you prove it? No, it says I'm not provable. Now, what does it come from? It comes from the absoluteness of mathematical truth. When it comes to mathematical truth, we think it's true or it's not true. Absolute. Karl Popper was another Austrian philosopher, ended up being a social philosopher, came and developed it into show that absoluteness leads us to trouble. Absolute freedom of speech lead to too much speech lead to crisis. Too much democracy leads to lack of democracy. So we need to figure out a way. How do we deal with this? The absolute is too much. We need to find nuances. And right now, I think it's a real struggle for us, how to deal with too much speech, too little speech. How do we do that? I think this is an ongoing struggle for us.
Okay, the next question. What are some of the challenges in crafting policy for technology? Aside from the challenges in getting such laws passed, are there challenges in creating the policies? I think they're distinguishing between the kind of legislation and the policies that I'll actually allow you to navigate those or enact.
So I said, I really don't think I can claim myself to be an expert in policy. There are people are trying to figure out, you know, we do like innovation. Innovation does build to economic growth. You know, there is some value. We like some innovation, but we understand that if you let technology run amok, it has unexpected consequences. And now we need to try to navigate this very narrow line. Okay, so I think the only way to do regulation will be by trial and error. We will establish some rules. You know, Europe is trying to establish some rule, and some of them will be successful. Some of them will be too restrictive, and we will have to back down. And some will be not restrictive enough, and we need to make them stronger. There is one of the wisest political sentence that I've ever read is the first sentence of the American Constitution. With the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union. The wisdom is There's no perfect union. A more perfect union. And our union has gone through ups and downs, and it's a quest. Is it perfect? It's never been perfect. We have a history that is, or even it is so shameful. We are debating whether to teach it, but it's still a quest overall. Hopefully, the long arc of history should tend toward justice, a more perfect union. I think the same thing will happen with regulation. You asked, do you have a magic bullet? I don't have a magic bullet. But saying, oh, we don't have a magic bullet, so we should do nothing. Okay. I mean, as we all know, life is a terminal disease. We all die at the end, but still we're trying to make the best of it. So let's start to regulate technology and learn by doing rather than learn just by thinking. I don't think we can learn just by thinking.
So you mentioned Europe, and this segues nicely into the next talk, or next question. Is there a discussion regarding regulation from the reverse standpoint? That is, not about regulating big tech according to what they're doing, but about protecting the rights of the tech user. So pointing out Europe's right to be forgotten rule. And then a little bit of clarification. It says, conceptualizing the user as an equal agent whose agency needs to be recognized. So that's what's motivating the question.
So so Europe starts very often with things about starting from human rights perspective. And I think this is correct. You start from the perception of human rights, okay? And many laws start from this notion of human rights. Part of the problem is that we have the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Supreme Court, not Constitution. U.S. Supreme Court says corporations are people, so they have rights too. They have right to do whatever they want. And I think like many people think it was a mistake. I think corporations are legal, are social creation. Actually, when there was a business, the business roundtable decision to go back to stakeholder responsibility, Gina Romti, who is the CEO of Jenny Romti, who is the CEO of IBM, said, society gives us the license to operate as a corporation. Therefore, society is entitled to dictate the terms of this operation. So people are now talking, for example, about writing constitutional amendment to turn over Citizen United. I'm far from a constitutional expert. I will be the first to say that. But to me, this is not enough. I think what we really need is a constitutional amendment to define the rights and responsibilities of corporations. The point is to think of Moshe Vardi, who sit in his home office in Bel Air and give a talk, and to think of, we have now $2 trillion corporations. I mean, to think of us, well, they're both people, so they both have the same rights and responsibility. That, to me, just flies in the face of reason. And we need to say these are corporations. For example, corporations have the limited liability corporations. Why should the investor be limited liability? Who gave them this right? Well, it's a law. Society gave them this right. So we need to sit down and think very hard. I think we need some kind of constitutional convention just for this one amendment. What are the rules, the rights and responsibility of corporations? Corporations are the major players in our economic system. And we have been we've been fighting this game now for over 100 years. Theodore Roosevelt had to fight against, Standard Oil. And so we have very narrow instrument, which is just antitrust. But it is time to sit down and says, what should be in our system? What are the roles and responsibility of corporations? Some of the argument is that part of what's happening in our economy is not even just technology per se, but growing concentration. We have growing concentration with tremendous power for some companies. And Tim Wood that I mentioned in the talk is now in the Biden administration. We will see. This corporation have a lot of power. When you are a $2 trillion corporation, you have tremendous. You can hire the best lawyer one can hire. You can lobby for Congress. I mean, there is a lot of power. With Citizen United, you can put tremendous amount of money for lobbying. I mean, we think of the U.S. government is the most powerful entity in the world. Well, this corporation will put a big fight. We'll see how it turns out.
Okay, so shifting slightly, how do you decide when it's okay to approve an automated driving program? It might reduce the total number of deaths per mile driven, but might change what sorts of deaths are caused. Is a death caused by a computer worse than one caused by human error? How do you try to figure out the proper equilibrium there?
So Amnon Shashua, who is an Israeli professor in machine vision, he started a company called Mobileye for the technology of automated driving. Company was bought by Intel for about $16 billion. So he's today one of the richest academics in the world. And he wrote an interesting article about it about 4 years ago. And he said, from a utilitarian point of view, if you're just a utilitarian, you say, well, United States, you know, about, I don't know, remember something like 35,000 people, I think, die every year from automobile crashes. Okay, suppose we can save 10% of them, reduce it from 35,000 to 30,000. We save 5,000 lives. It sounds good. We should save 5,000 lives. He said he doesn't think that people will be able to tolerate this kind of. There is a difference somehow between just looking at mortality, but looking at a autonomous vehicle killing people. And so the question is, okay, how are we going to navigate it? And he said, no, people would tolerate maybe 90% mortality, but if you suddenly to say no, you know, we started from 35,000 people, suddenly we said, no, only 5,000 people will be killed, but we saved, but now machines will kill 5,000 people. And he said people will not be able to tolerate it. So there is an issue here, not just utilitarian calculus, but what will people tolerate? In the reality, we are very tolerant towards human error. When we make mistake, oh, well, we're human. We're only human. But for machines to go around and kill people, no, that's not acceptable. So the issue here of just even of perception, what kind of death are we going to tolerate and what we are not going to tolerate? And Shashua concludes that he thinks that we should expect to see 90% reduction in mortality, more than that. I think he said 99% reduction in mortality for people to tolerate it. So we should go from 30,000 maybe to 300. He said, just think about it. Every time a machine, an auto AV kills a person, the whole investigation, this front page news. Imagine we see it. He said, imagine this is every day in the newspaper. People will balk to say no. For what we are not willing to tolerate it. There's a whole other question. So on one hand, so a few years ago, I admit I was one of the people who said AVs are fantastic. They will save lives. But now you need to start thinking about what are the other implications. For example, how will it change the urban landscape? So for example, it's very clear that AVs and human beings together, the modus vivendi is not very good. Why? Because people are unpredictable. A kid throws a ball into the street. A bike rider, suddenly something falls, the wallet falls down and he stops to pick it up. This is very, very hard to build AVs that can handle with all these contingencies. So people say, well, one way we handle it, on the freeway, we don't allow pedestrians. So we need to reconfigure our urban landscape so we will have AVs and we will save lives. Now you think it through. What does it mean? So I don't, if we say, what, we'll have AVs, autonomous trucks on the highway, we'll have autonomous trucks, there will be maybe a special lane for them. Maybe that will work well. But I live on it's called even lane. It's not even called a street, and there are about maybe 40 houses in this small street. Suddenly, if you say no, kids cannot walk on the street because we have AVs here. That will change. It will completely change our urban landscape. Let's think it through before we go there. Okay. Yes, I would love to save lives. And one way we can save lives is investing more in public transportation, for example. What will be more efficient? Or take all this technology we're developing and make cars safer. Think how many billions of dollars have been spent on AVs. Take this technology and make human-driven cars safer. We have not seen the same kind of investment in making just cars, automobile safer. My worry is we are thinking about one lens, which I've said, of course, incredibly important lens, saving lives. In some sense, it's the ultimate thing. But what is the total picture? We have not done this kind of analysis. No, I have not seen a thorough analysis would look at the whole, what are going to be the impact? And there are always going to be unforeseen consequences. We know that. But let's try to foresee some consequences before we deploy this technology.
Okay, next question. I'm concerned that AI will be taking over different professions, making people extraneous. For example, it is my understanding that the music for the Tokyo Olympics was created by AI. So even with the creative professions, AI could be taking over. Could you address that?
So the truth of the matter is that technology has been eliminating jobs now for the past generation. And part of the problem is that people have said about AI, as soon as we know how to do it, it's not AI anymore, just an algorithm. You have all these industrial robots that go today, look at what a major, you can go and Google, for example, Tesla factory floor. It's all by industrial robots, okay? In fact, the lights are on so they can take pictures because the robots don't even need lights, okay? So the starting from around people think that we lost job in manufacturing because of globalization. Globalization clearly played a role by making manufacturing much more competitive. So US industry went into high-end manufacturing and it be a massive amount of automation. So we have lost more than 10 million jobs, industrial jobs in manufacturing. These were good jobs. These were middle-class jobs. They estimated for every such a manufacturing job lost, about 4 other jobs are lost in the community because people who made $40,000 to $60,000 a year, they were consumers. They went out, they went shopping, they bought this, they bought that. They provided many jobs for other people. So when we want to understand today, one of the reasons for the polarization to American society, I see 2 factors. One of them is social media that create these filter bubbles, but also the fact that the college educated people with 4-year college degrees generally have done well, and people with high school degree or less have seen their real income decline. This already happened. Now, what jobs are being automated? The jobs that are always being automated are routine jobs, routine skills, okay? Routine skill. These are the jobs that are being automated. So the concept of what is routine gets wider and wider. So it used to be that it will have manufacturing jobs became routine, but gradually we have more and more routine jobs being automated, and that means that we have like paralegal jobs may become automated. Labor economists describe it as the polarization of the job market. So that we think a massive number of jobs will be eliminated. But what's really happening is that high-skill jobs, the high-skill part of the job market is doing well. The low skill is kind of stable. Think of trying to build a robot to automate the job of the busboy. Nobody can build such a robot. But we pay the busboy minimum wage, so why automate? It's not even economically attractive to automate it. So the low-end jobs stay essentially in terms of flat income. The high-end job, people with college degrees, at about 1/3 of the people. They are, in fact, we have more and more in the high-end job. And the middle skill jobs, these are the job where we see the shrink. And that means that more and more categories of jobs, say, for example, paralegal, they don't necessarily have to be creative, but they are routine jobs, they also shrink. So yes, so there is a major issue of automation, but it's not about just massive loss of jobs. It's mostly how it creates a gap between educated 4-year college educated people and the low skill jobs. This is a major gap in our society.
All right, we have 4 questions remaining. Should try to get that in before the end of the hour. So this person says, well, I agree that we need better policy. Policy still requires knowing what the problems are. Historically, we're very bad at anticipating what technology will do when it's released in the world, and to reason about the ethical and other issues ahead of time. Do you agree that we need to address this? How should this be done? How do we go about it?
So I think it's very difficult to know in advance what are the unforeseen consequences. And that's why I said we need to think about it as a more perfect union. We have a technology. We don't wait until the consequences are horrific. We see what the impact of technology is. You know, if you think now we're saying, okay, Google, Facebook, all of these companies, let's regulate them now. I mean, they have been operating, these companies have been operating now for 25 years. Now we're saying, oh, we need to do something about it. So the question is, do we watch for consequences faster, sooner, and start thinking about, okay, what do we need to change? What are the boundary conditions we need to change? Waiting for 25 years and then says, oh, let's do something about it. This is very late in the game. So the idea is to have, again, a back and forth. Technology coming, we discover some impact, we understand this is not good, what should we do about it? I mean, imagine that, think what happened when you have a new medications, okay? So the FDA approve a new medication. If there are adverse effects, the doctors have to report them. It may go back to the FDA. The FDA says we need to change the guideline, we need to change the dosage, we need to, this medication, we put it back from the market. We take, we do an incremental process. We don't just say, well, let's deploy the medication. Let's wait 25 years. After many people died, then maybe we'll do something. We don't have to wait that long before we do something. I agree, it's very hard to predict all the consequences in advance. But let's not wait 25 years before we do some attempt at regulation.
How can AI reflect both individual rights and societal rights?
This is how we are. This is the issue, the tension between personal rights. It's not just about AI. The tension between personal rights and societal rights. This is one of the major dilemma in our society. How do we balance personal rights, where we tend to be absolutists about this? We have freedom of speech, very strong, complete freedom of speech. Yes, but there's no complete freedom of speech. Why? You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. We start to talk about, okay, how do we handle it? How do we balance the individual rights with societal rights? And I don't know, this society, I don't know that we have found just the right balance between the two things. We understand, we start from human rights. We are less good in, especially American society, to be very individualistic and say, okay, what about societal rights? Now, the Constitution does talk about union, a more perfect union. It does talk about society. But I don't know that we have found, define societal rights. And how do we balance between personal rights and societal rights? I think that's one of the major challenges for our society. Just look, we can't agree on think that for us, look, just put a damn mask, okay? What is the big deal? You put a seatbelt, right? Nobody thinks, oh my goodness, I have to put a seatbelt. We put a seatbelt. For our safety, for safety of society, we put a seatbelt. But somehow things have become politicized in a way that is just hard to fathom what happened to us. I just keep thinking, what happened to us? How did we get there? They're very difficult question to me.
Okay, machine learning encodes bias from training data, from parameters that are set, et cetera. And as you said, learns effectively history. Thus, any regulation of speech or information requires some human to make policy decisions at some stage. Who gets to make those decisions?
So, I think we have struggled with it over the years. We have freedom of speech, but then people don't like certain speech people don't like. So we go to the courts, and when I was many years ago, I rented a an apartment from a law student for the summer. I went to Stanford and I rented an apartment for the summer. And I thought, oh, I'm going to try to learn a little law, learn my legal education, because he had many books there. And I opened some book, contract law. Oh my, this is so dull. I mean, this was just unbelievably dull. I said, okay, forget about it. I'm going to look at a book on the constitutional law. And it turns out, okay, there are 10 amendments. They may conflict with each other. So now you go to the court and you have this and this and that. You have 10 amendments. They're in conflict with each other. So the Supreme Court has established arcane rules about, you need to define an order between these amendments and that amendment. And I thought there would be some philosophical visions. And it was, again, very, very technical. I would say, no, I'm so glad I'm not a law student. I don't want to have to learn all this stuff. So the answer is, it is, as a society, when we have 10 amendments, we are struggling. What is the right balance between them?
We're on the last question, so we will definitely
Yes.
get it done.
Yeah.
Person, thanks you for your engaging presentation. Wants to comment on, let's see, your talk kind of pivoted somewhat from early history about thinking about intelligent machines to social media as information gathering. So the person asks, what are some of the potential consequences of robot technology? For example, of labor being replaced as well as military technology, which we already see, for instance, in drone strikes and such.
So I mentioned kind of somewhat briefly that I think I can give a whole talk on automation and its impact on the labor market, and I think it has a profound impact that we in academia are unaware of, because we sit in our educated. I mean, part of our society is compartmentalized. If you are an educated professional, then most likely your friends are educated professionals and your children are going to be educated professionals, and you spend your life in education bubble. Some people came out to working class. I hear sometimes from colleagues that said, oh, I went to my in-laws for Thanksgiving and I had to keep my mouth shut the whole time, okay? So once in a while we get a glimpse, but generally we sit inside our bubble. So we have not seen how automation has already had very deep and adverse impact on our society. And this polarization, I call it, I said, that people thought it will create, technology has not created mass unemployment, but it has created pockets of unemployment. For example, if you look at working class men, so these are men without college education, but 1 in 5 is not working. But 1 in 5 of these are men, what we call prime age men between 25 and 55. So they're not in school, they're way too young to retire. 1 in 5 is not working. When you hear 20% unemployment, this is something you hear about countries in deep economic crisis. So this is not a statistic for this country, but it's for a certain segment of this society. This is described as a social calamity, because there are huge social consequences when especially men don't have jobs. When women don't have jobs, they usually are working, but not for money. They're taking care of someone, either young or old. When men don't have jobs, they're trouble. So we already have a huge impact of automation. It's just not something that we see in our world. But if you want to understand, if you want to see, you watch like Trump rallies, and you saw people very angry. You saw people, shouting, raising their feet, and you ask, what are they angry about? The answer is, if you look at working class, again, you look at working class men, you see they have lost job and they have lost real income. You look at real dollars, they have lost income. So there is a lot that's happening that's just invisible, and the so-called the chattering classes, the people who write in opinion, the newspaper, it's not in their world, because this knowledge-based world, knowledge-intensive society is good for college-educated people, but it's not been equally good for everyone. So now we are worried, oh, what will happen to creative jobs will get disappeared? And my answer is, welcome to the club, right? There's already people being affected by automation, except we think, no, we're creative, so we should be somehow immune from that. The definition of routine keeps expanding. As technology gets better, more and more jobs become, so to speak, routine, and they can be automated. And it is a continued, and so far as a society who have not come at all to what do we do about this? What do we do about this? President Obama talked about it towards the end of his term, and he said we need a new socioeconomic compact. You know, things like some people talk about universal basic income, which is very controversial, but we will have to rethink our, if we have now 20% are not working, what happens when it become 30% of working class men not working? The crisis will just deepen.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We very much appreciate the time you spent for the talk and for the questions and answers. I'd like to remind everybody who's still online, so we will continue again tomorrow at 3:30. We have 6 faculty members that are going to each give 10-minute talks around these kind of topics, and it is a pretty diverse group spread across Maine and Medical Campus. I think that'll be enjoyable. And then Moshe is going to join a roundtable with Erica George and Dan Reed, and that will be headed by Valerio Pascucci. So we'll end this with people still being able to ask some questions of that roundtable. So thank you to everyone. Wish you a good evening and see you tomorrow at 3:30.
See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.